I'm Barbara Reynolds, 68, retired from nursing after 30 years at Portland General. Yesterday, I stood frozen outside my living room as my son Thomas and his wife Stephanie laughed about their plan to have me declared incompetent. Once we get power of attorney, Thomas said, that $1.2 million in house are as good as ours. My hands trembled, but I kept quiet. I'd sacrificed everything for him as a single mother. Double shifts, no vacations, second-hand clothes. Little did they know, I was always 10 steps ahead. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that subscribe button if you've ever dealt with family betrayal. Trust me, what happened next will shock you. Let me take you through how I discovered their plan and fought back. Thomas was just 10 when his father, my husband Robert, died in a construction accident. The settlement was barely enough to pay off our mortgage, leaving me a young widow with a child to raise alone. I picked up every extra shift I could at Portland General, working through holidays and weekends, sometimes doing double or even triple shifts when the emergency department was short-staffed. My colleagues thought I was crazy, but I had a mission: giving Thomas the life and education his father would have wanted for him. Those years were difficult but rewarding. I'd come home exhausted to find Thomas had made dinner, usually just macaroni and cheese, but the effort touched my heart. We were a team, supporting each other through everything. When he graduated from Oregon State with honors, I couldn't have been prouder. The sacrifices had been worth it. Thomas met Stephanie during his graduate program, and initially, I was thrilled. She was charming, attentive, and seemed to make my son happy. After their wedding 5 years ago, our family felt complete again. I embraced Stephanie like the daughter I never had, inviting them for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations, always including her in family traditions. The first subtle red flag appeared last year when I mentioned updating my will. Suddenly, Thomas and Stephanie began visiting more frequently. Their newfound attentiveness felt strange. Thomas calling daily to check in when previously we'd speak once a week. Stephanie brought homemade meals and offered to clean my house, things she'd never done before. During one visit, Thomas casually asked about my retirement accounts. "Mom, I was thinking about your finances. Do you have your 401k in aggressive or conservative investments?" When I explained my financial advisor had balanced my portfolio, he pressed for details about specific amounts and account numbers, claiming he wanted to learn about retirement planning. Stephanie joined in with her own concerning behaviors. While helping me with dishes after dinner, she remarked, "This house must be so much work for you to maintain, Barbara. Wouldn't a nice condo be easier to manage?" When I explained I loved my garden and neighborhood of 30 years, she exchanged a look with Thomas I couldn't quite interpret. The questions continued with increasing frequency. Thomas offered to help with my financial decisions, suggesting I was getting too old to manage such complex matters. "Mom, financial planning is complicated these days. Let me handle some of this for you." His concern might have seemed touching, if not for the eagerness behind his eyes. One afternoon while paying bills, I noticed my bank statement was missing from its usual place. I called the bank to request a replacement and discovered my online password had been changed, something I definitely hadn't done. The representative helped restore my access, but the incident left me unsettled. Thomas and Stephanie's lifestyle had also changed dramatically. Despite Thomas's modest income as a community college administrator and Stephanie's part-time work as a yoga instructor, they suddenly drove a brand new BMW. Stephanie now wore designer clothes and flashed expensive jewelry. Their social media showed lavish vacations to Bali and the Maldives. When I asked how they could afford such luxuries, Thomas vaguely mentioned smart investments and quickly changed the subject. Most disturbing was how Thomas began planting seeds of doubt about my mental capacity. At a family gathering, I forgot my cousin's husband's name momentarily, a simple senior moment. Thomas immediately jumped in. "See what I mean about Mom getting forgetful? It's happening more often now." His exaggerated concern and public embarrassment felt calculated rather than genuine. The final piece clicked when my friend Judith, who works at the local credit union, called me. "Barbara, did you know Thomas inquired about a loan using your house as collateral?" she asked. This prompted me to do some investigating, and I discovered Thomas had accumulated nearly $200,000 in gambling debts at casinos in nearby Lincoln City. He'd also invested heavily in a friend's startup that had recently failed. That's when I began documenting everything, every unusual question, every missing document, every attempted financial intrusion. Something was very wrong, and my nursing instincts told me to be prepared. The first concrete evidence of betrayal came when I received a call from another bank where I held a small savings account. "Mrs. Reynolds, we're confirming the addition of your son Thomas as a joint account holder," the representative said cheerfully. I nearly dropped the phone. I had authorized no such change. "There must be some mistake," I replied, maintaining composure. "Could you tell me when this request was made?" The representative explained that Thomas had come in person, presenting a power of attorney document, one I had supposedly signed giving him authority to manage my financial affairs. I knew immediately this document was forged, but rather than alerting the representative, I asked her to place a temporary hold on any changes while I sorted out some confusion. The next weekend, Thomas and Stephanie came for their now regular Sunday visit. While Thomas showered before dinner, his briefcase sat open on my guest bed. Something compelled me to look inside. Call it mother's intuition, or simply suspicion. Hidden beneath some work papers, I found a partially completed petition for guardianship, citing my increasing cognitive decline and inability to manage personal affairs. The document detailed plans to have me declared legally incompetent at a hearing already scheduled for the following month. My hands trembled as I quickly photographed the documents with my phone and returned everything exactly as I'd found it. During dinner, I smiled and asked about their week as if nothing had changed, while inside my heart was shattering. Later that evening, I excused myself to the kitchen to prepare coffee. Thomas and Stephanie remained in the living room, speaking in hushed tones they thought I couldn't hear. "Once we get the guardianship, we can list the house immediately," Stephanie whispered. "My realtor friend says we could get at least $600,000 in this market." Thomas chuckled. "Plus the accounts. Mom has no idea how much she's actually worth. The nurse pension, Dad's life insurance that she invested, the inheritance from Grandma. It's well over $1 million altogether. And we deserve it," Stephanie added. "We've been visiting this old lady every week for months. I'm going crazy pretending to care about her garden and cat." Their laughter felt like physical blows. The coffee pot slipped from my hand, crashing to the floor. They immediately fell silent, and Thomas rushed in, concern painted across his face, concern I now recognized as completely artificial. "Mom, are you okay? Did you get confused again?" His words were sympathetic, but his eyes surveyed the scene, clearly assessing whether this accident could serve as further evidence of my supposed decline. The following week brought another disturbing incident. Thomas invited several extended family members for dinner at my house, an unusual move since he rarely organized family gatherings. Throughout the evening, he created situations designed to embarrass me. He asked me to recall specific details from decades ago, then exchanged knowing glances with others when I couldn't remember every particular. When I misplaced my reading glasses, he dramatically helped search for them, finally finding them in the refrigerator where I was certain I hadn't left them. "It's getting worse," he whispered loudly to my sister-in-law. "Last week she left the stove on overnight." This was an outright lie. I had always been meticulously careful with appliances, a habit from my nursing days. After everyone left, my friend Judith called. "Barbara, something seemed off tonight. Thomas kept asking me how long I've noticed your memory issues. He wanted me to confirm you've been declining." Judith had been my friend for 30 years and knew me better than almost anyone. I told him you're sharp as ever, but he seemed disappointed by my answer. This confirmed my growing suspicion. Thomas wasn't just opportunistically taking advantage of a few senior moments, he was actively constructing a false narrative about my mental decline. That night, I made a decision that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. I purchased small recording devices and placed them strategically in my living room and kitchen. The betrayal of my privacy felt terrible, but I needed evidence of what was happening in my own home when I wasn't present. The recordings confirmed my worst fears. 2 days later, while I was supposedly at my book club, Thomas and Stephanie came to my house using the spare key I'd given them for emergencies. The recording captured their entire conversation as they searched through my financial documents. This confirmed my growing suspicion. Thomas wasn't just opportunistically taking advantage of a few senior moments, he was actively constructing a false narrative about my mental decline. "What about her sister? Won't she ask questions?" Stephanie asked. "Aunt Linda lives in Florida, and barely stays in touch. By the time she figures anything out, the money will be moved offshore. Thomas's voice was unrecognizable to me, cold and calculating. And your mom? We'll find some cheap nursing home once the house sells. Medicaid can cover it. We'll have transferred all her assets by then. She'll be fine. Probably won't even know the difference with her memory issues. Their callous laughter echoed through my empty house as I later listened to the recording, tears streaming down my face. The son I'd raised, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, was not just planning to take my money but to discard me like unwanted furniture. For several days, I fell into despair. I considered confronting Thomas, imagined the satisfaction of playing the recordings for him, showing him I knew everything, but nursing had taught me the value of strategic thinking over emotional reactions. If I confronted him now, he would simply find another way, perhaps one I couldn't anticipate or defend against. No, this situation required careful planning, not a dramatic confrontation. Thomas clearly had a comprehensive plan to take everything from me. I needed an equally comprehensive plan to protect myself. With painful clarity, I realized this was no longer about saving my relationship with my son. That relationship, at least as I had understood it, was already gone. This was about survival. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. If Thomas wanted a fight, I would give him one, but on my terms, not his. I began by continuing to act normally around Thomas and Stephanie, giving no indication that I knew about their plans. This facade was emotionally exhausting but strategically necessary. My first step was to contact Margaret Chen, a former nursing colleague who now worked as an advocate for senior citizens. We met for coffee at a small cafe across town, where there was no chance of running into Thomas. "This happens more than you'd believe," Margaret said after I explained my situation. "Elder financial abuse is epidemic, and when it's family members, it's particularly difficult to combat." Margaret outlined the resources available to me and connected me with Dana Wilson, an attorney specializing in elder law. Dana's office was deliberately understated, no flashy decor or imposing mahogany desk designed to intimidate clients. Instead, she created an atmosphere of calm competence. "The guardianship petition is our most immediate concern," Dana explained after reviewing the documents I'd photographed. "Thomas is trying to use the legal system against you, but we can use it to protect you instead." Dana recommended a comprehensive medical evaluation to document my cognitive competence. "We need objective evidence that you're fully capable of managing your own affairs." She referred me to Dr. Richard Brooks, a renowned geriatric specialist known for his expertise in distinguishing normal aging from cognitive impairment. His assessment was thorough memory tests, problem-solving exercises, practical skills demonstrations. After 4 hours of evaluation, his conclusion was definitive. "Mrs. Reynolds, your cognitive function is excellent for any age, let alone someone of 68, Dr. Brooks explained. "Your results are actually above average in several categories." He provided detailed documentation that would be crucial evidence against Thomas's claims. While building my legal defense, I also worked to secure personal support. Frank Henderson, my neighbor and a retired detective, had always been kind but distant until I explained my situation. His professional instincts immediately engaged. "You need surveillance and security," Frank advised. "If they're willing to forge documents, there's no telling what else they might do." He helped me install additional recording devices and a security system, then taught me how to properly document and preserve evidence. One of my most painful tasks was reaching out to Harold Jennings, Thomas's godfather and a respected family court judge. Though semi-retired, Harold still commanded considerable influence in the legal community. We met in his home office, where fishing trophies competed for space with legal texts. "I remember holding Thomas the day he was born," Harold said, his voice heavy with disappointment after listening to the recordings. "Robert would be heartbroken to see what he's become. I keep wondering where I went wrong," I admitted, the guilt crushing me despite my anger. "Barbara, this isn't your failure," Harold assured me. "Some people make terrible choices despite having every advantage and opportunity. The question now is how to protect you." Harold couldn't directly intervene in my case due to his relationship with our family, but his guidance on navigating the court system proved invaluable. He also connected me with Judge Michaela Patel, who often presided over guardianship cases and had a reputation for carefully scrutinizing claims of incompetency. My support network grew to include several neighbors, church members, and former colleagues, people who had known me for years and could testify to my mental acuity. My weekly bridge club became an unexpected source of strength, with members taking turns accompanying me to appointments and ensuring I was never alone when Thomas and Stephanie visited. The emotional toll was considerable. There were nights I lay awake wondering if fighting my own son was worth it. Perhaps I should simply give him what he wanted. I had lived my life already, after all. But then I would remember Thomas and Stephanie laughing about putting me in a cheap nursing home, and my resolve would harden. While building my support network, I also took steps to protect my assets. Dana helped me establish a revocable trust with a professional trustee, a former banker named Patricia Morgan who specialized in asset protection. We transferred most of my accounts into the trust, leaving only enough in my personal accounts to avoid raising immediate suspicion with Thomas. The trust gives you complete control while you're competent, Patricia explained. But unlike a power of attorney, it can't be easily manipulated or abused. We also documented every valuable item in my home with photographs and appraisals after I discovered several family heirlooms had mysteriously disappeared following Thomas and Stephanie's visits. Each step was methodical, each alliance carefully cultivated. I was no longer just a mother betrayed by her son, I was becoming a formidable opponent. Thomas had spent months developing his plan to take everything from me. What he didn't realize was that I had spent a lifetime developing the resilience and determination to fight back. Thomas's next move came during what appeared to be an innocent family dinner. He arrived with Stephanie and an unexpected guest, Dr. Alan Lawson, whom Thomas introduced as an old college friend who happened to be in town. Throughout dinner, Dr. Lawson asked oddly specific questions about my daily routines, memory, and ability to manage household tasks. "Do you ever forget to pay bills, Mrs. Reynolds?" he inquired casually between bites of lasagna. "Have you noticed any difficulties following recipes you've made for years? Do you ever get lost in familiar places?" His clinical interest was barely disguised as friendly conversation. Having worked alongside neurologists for decades, I immediately recognized his questions as an informal cognitive assessment. Thomas watched our interaction with barely concealed anticipation. I decided to play along, occasionally hesitating before answering or pretending to struggle, recalling a recent event. I even accidentally put salt in my coffee instead of sugar when I thought they were watching. Their exchange of triumphant glances confirmed my suspicions. Dr. Lawson was documenting supposed evidence of my cognitive decline. After they left, Frank retrieved the recordings from the devices we'd installed. Dr. Lawson could be heard telling Thomas in my driveway, "I can definitely provide a statement about observed cognitive inconsistencies. It won't be as good as an official evaluation, but it should help with the preliminary hearing." With this evidence in hand, Dana filed a preemptive motion detailing our concerns about Thomas's intentions and requesting that any guardianship proceedings be assigned to Judge Patel. We also submitted Dr. Brooks's comprehensive evaluation documenting my cognitive competence. Thomas made his official move the following week, filing for emergency guardianship. His petition claimed I had demonstrated rapidly accelerating dementia symptoms and was at immediate risk of financial exploitation by unscrupulous friends. The irony would have been amusing if the situation weren't so heartbreaking. The hearing was scheduled with remarkable speed. Clearly, Thomas had connections in the court. Fortunately, thanks to Harold's advice, Dana had anticipated this tactic and had already prepared our response. When we arrived at court, Thomas was visibly shocked to see me accompanied not only by Dana but also by Dr. Brooks and several other supporters. His attorney, a slick young man named Ryan Duffy, appeared equally surprised when Dana presented our comprehensive evidence package to the judge. It included my medical evaluation, financial records demonstrating my continued competent management of assets, and affidavits from numerous community members attesting to my mental acuity. "Your Honor," Dana argued, "this petition is not only without merit but appears to be part of a deliberate attempt to gain control of Mrs. Reynolds' substantial assets." Thomas's face flushed with anger as Dana methodically dismantled his claims. When she played a small portion of the recorded conversation between Thomas and Stephanie discussing the cheap nursing home, audible gasps echoed through the courtroom. Thomas's attorney attempted to object to the recording, claiming it was obtained without consent, but Dana was prepared. "Oregon is a one-party consent state for recordings in one's own home. Your Honor, Mrs. Reynolds was fully within her rights to record conversations in her own residence, especially when she had reason to believe financial exploitation was being planned. The judge, thankfully it was Judge Patel, as we'd requested, listened carefully to both sides before speaking. I see no evidence supporting the need for emergency guardianship. In fact, I'm troubled by the apparent misrepresentations in this petition. She dismissed Thomas's request and ordered a full competency evaluation by a court-appointed specialist before any further guardianship proceedings could continue. Thomas's face flushed with anger as Dana methodically dismantled his claims. When she played a small portion of the recorded conversation between Thomas and Stephanie discussing the cheap nursing home, audible gasps echoed through the courtroom. Dana stepped between us. All communications should go through counsel from now on. Mr. Reynolds. Thomas's attorney attempted to object to the recording, claiming it was obtained without consent, but Dana was prepared. Oregon is a one-party consent state for recordings in one's own home. Your Honor, Mrs. Reynolds was fully within her rights to record conversations in her own residence, especially when she had reason to believe financial exploitation was being planned. The aftermath of this first confrontation brought new challenges. Thomas shifted tactics, attempting to isolate me from my support network. Stephanie began calling my friends, expressing concerns about my mental health, and suggesting I was being manipulated by unscrupulous attorneys. The fury that flashed across Thomas's face revealed his true nature more clearly than any recording ever could. This was just the first skirmish in what would clearly be a prolonged battle, but we had won an important victory. With Dana's guidance, I decided to have Judith pretend to sympathize with Thomas and Stephanie to gather more information about their plans. This counterintelligence proved invaluable, as Thomas regrouped and prepared his next attack. Meanwhile, I discovered Thomas had attempted to access my safe deposit box using a forged authorization letter. Fortunately, the bank manager knew me personally and called to verify before allowing access. This failed attempt became another piece of evidence documenting Thomas's systematic efforts to gain control of my assets. Though we had won this initial confrontation, I knew Thomas wouldn't give up easily. There was too much money at stake. As Dana reminded me, we've won the first battle, but the war is just beginning. Nevertheless, this first victory gave me something I desperately needed: hope that I could ultimately protect myself from my son's betrayal. Thomas wasted no time regrouping after his initial defeat. Within a week, he had replaced the inexperienced Ryan Duffy with Gregory Phillips, an attorney notorious in elder law circles for his aggressive tactics in guardianship cases. Phillips had a reputation for finding legal loopholes to seize control of seniors' assets, often working with a network of corrupt doctors and social workers who provided convenient evidence of incapacity. Dana grimaced when I told her about Phillips' involvement. He's dangerous, she warned. He doesn't care about ethics, only winning. And he's very good at making competent people look incompetent. Their new strategy became evident when I began receiving concerned calls from friends asking if I was okay. Apparently, Thomas and Stephanie were spreading stories that I wasn't being manipulated by Thomas, but rather by my new friends who had isolated me from family and were controlling my decisions. They're claiming Dana is after your money, Margaret explained, after a community luncheon where Stephanie had been particularly vocal. They're painting this picture that you've fallen under the influence of people taking advantage of your vulnerability. This narrative was cleverly crafted. It positioned Thomas as my protector rather than my exploiter, making it harder for me to defend against his claims without appearing to confirm them. It was gaslighting at its most sophisticated level. The situation escalated dramatically one evening when 2 police officers appeared at my door for a wellness check. Someone, obviously Thomas, had reported concerns about my safety and welfare. We received a call that you might be in danger, ma'am, the younger officer explained somewhat apologetically. Your son is concerned you're being financially exploited by some new acquaintances. I invited them in, maintained my composure, and explained the situation truthfully. The officers seemed satisfied with my obvious competence, but the damage was already done. During their inspection of my home, which I permitted to demonstrate transparency, several items were accidentally disturbed, including a file cabinet containing important documents. After they left, I discovered subtle evidence that someone had quickly searched through my papers while one officer distracted me with questions. The next morning, I found my neighbor Frank waiting on my porch with a grim expression. You should see this, he said, showing me his phone. On a neighborhood social media group, Thomas had posted a long, emotional plea asking neighbors to keep an eye on my vulnerable mother and report any suspicious visitors who might be taking advantage of her condition. The post was a masterpiece of manipulation. Thomas portrayed himself as the loving, concerned son, while simultaneously painting me as cognitively impaired. Dozens of well-meaning but uninformed neighbors had responded with sympathy and promises to watch my house. "He's trying to turn your own community against you," Frank observed. "Make you a prisoner in your own home." The strategy extended beyond my immediate neighborhood. Stephanie, who taught yoga at the senior center, began sharing concerns about my mental health with other seniors. Several longtime acquaintances stopped calling or visiting, clearly uncomfortable with the situation and unsure what to believe. The most painful betrayal came from my younger sister Linda. Thomas had always been her favorite nephew, and she lived too far away to see the changes in his behavior firsthand. When she called from Florida, her voice was tight with worry and accusation. "Tommy says you've been acting paranoid, Barbara." She began without even a greeting. "He says you're recording conversations and hiring lawyers to keep him away from you." "There's more to the story, Linda," I tried to explain. "He showed me the doctor's report about your memory issues," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "I know it's hard to accept, but you need help, not lawyers." No matter what evidence I offered, Linda had already decided to believe Thomas's version. The sister who had known me all my life was now convinced I was mentally incompetent, based solely on Thomas's claims. This betrayal cut deeper than Thomas's. She should have known me better, should have at least questioned his sudden concerns. The situation took a dangerous turn when I experienced unusual drowsiness after Thomas and Stephanie brought dinner one evening. I'd been careful to watch them in the kitchen, but they'd insisted on serving my plate. The next morning, I found my blood pressure dangerously low and struggled to maintain consciousness. Dr. Brooks ordered immediate testing and discovered traces of my blood pressure medication at 3 times the normal dosage. "Someone tampered with your medication, Barbara," Dr. Brooks confirmed gravely. "This wasn't an accident." Although we couldn't prove Thomas's involvement, the timing was suspicious. Dana added this incident to our growing file of evidence and suggested I stay with friends for a few days while recovering. During this brief absence from my home, Thomas used his key to enter my house, claiming he was checking on me after I didn't answer his calls. The hospital stay, though brief, gave Thomas an opportunity he quickly exploited. He filed an emergency petition claiming my hospitalization demonstrated my inability to care for myself. This time, he came prepared with a statement from Dr. Lawson, his college friend, who had now conducted a professional assessment based on our dinner interaction. The emergency hearing was assigned to Judge William Garfield rather than Judge Patel, almost certainly a deliberate manipulation by Phillips, who had connections throughout the court system. Judge Garfield was known for his conservative approach to elder care, often erring on the side of family control for safety reasons. Dana and I arrived at court to find Dr. Michael Sullivan, the court-appointed evaluator, waiting to interview me before the hearing. Dr. Sullivan's evaluation seemed rushed and perfunctory, with questions that appeared designed to expose confusion rather than assess true cognitive function. "How many generations back can you name your ancestors?" he asked at one point, a question irrelevant to daily functioning and designed to make anyone struggle. When I hesitated on a mathematical calculation involving percentages, a momentary delay anyone might experience, he made a note with a concerned expression. The evaluation felt like a trap rather than an objective assessment. The hearing itself was equally troubling. Judge Garfield gave Thomas's attorney considerable leeway while repeatedly interrupting Dana. Dr. Sullivan's preliminary report emphasized my hesitation and confusion without acknowledging the contexts that would make such responses normal. For the first time, I felt the system itself working against me. The very legal structures designed to protect vulnerable seniors were being weaponized to strip me of my autonomy. The low point came when I returned home from court to find Stephanie supervising movers who were boxing up family photographs and heirlooms. "Just getting some things organized for you," she explained with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thomas thought these might be cluttering your space." I ordered them out immediately. But the message was clear. They believed victory was imminent. They were already dividing my possessions while I still lived in my home. That night, alone in my partially ransacked house, I faced my darkest moment. The people I should have been able to trust most, my son, my sister, even the legal system had turned against me. For the first time, I wondered if fighting was worth it. Perhaps surrendering would be easier than enduring this ongoing betrayal and humiliation. The next morning, I found my accounts temporarily frozen, pending the guardianship investigation, another of Philip's tactics. I couldn't access my own money to pay bills or buy groceries. The walls seemed to be closing in from all sides. I called Dana in tears, ready to concede defeat. Her response was immediate and firm. "This is exactly what they want, to make you feel hopeless enough to give up. But we're not beaten yet, Barbara. Not by a long shot." She arrived an hour later with Margaret and a criminal attorney named Victor Ramirez. "We've been playing by their rules," Victor explained. "It's time to change the game." The breakthrough in our case came from an unexpected direction. While reviewing my financial records for the upcoming court date, Dana noticed something unusual about the documentation Thomas had submitted to support his claims that I was financially incompetent. "These statements have details that wouldn't be in public records," she observed, pointing to account numbers and specific transaction histories. "This information could only come from someone with direct access to your financial records." The realization hit me like a physical blow. "James Wilson," I whispered. James had been my accountant for over 20 years, handling my tax returns and providing occasional financial advice. He had been Robert's friend before becoming our family accountant. I had trusted him completely. A quick investigation confirmed our suspicions. James had been providing Thomas with detailed information about my finances for months, including copies of confidential tax returns and investment statements. The betrayal was stunning and illegal. Rather than confronting James immediately, Dana suggested a strategic approach. We scheduled an appointment with him under the pretense of estate planning questions. I wore a recording device approved by Victor, the criminal attorney. James appeared perfectly normal during our meeting, reviewing potential tax strategies with his usual professionalism. Only when I casually mentioned Thomas's guardianship petition did his demeanor change subtly, a tightening around the eyes, a momentary hesitation. "I heard about that," he said carefully. "Difficult situation. The strangest thing," I continued, "is that Thomas somehow had copies of financial statements that should have been confidential. I can't figure out how he accessed them." James shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Perhaps you shared them at some point and forgot?" he suggested, unconsciously participating in the narrative of my supposed cognitive decline. "I heard about that," he said carefully. "Difficult situation." The color drained from his face. "Barbara, or perhaps someone gave them to him," I replied, meeting his eyes directly. "Someone who had access to my records. Someone like you." "James, we have proof," I interrupted, though this was partially a bluff. "What I want to know is why. Why would you betray a client of 20 years? Why would you betray Robert's memory this way?" "A percentage of my money," I clarified, disgust evident in my voice. James nodded miserably. 2% of the estate value once he secured control. It would have been about $24,000. "So you sold me out for $24,000, I said quietly. 20 years of trust for $24,000. His shame was palpable. "I've been struggling financially since the divorce," he explained, though it sounded hollow even to him. "When Thomas described your supposed symptoms, I convinced myself I was helping you. By helping my son steal my life savings?" The bluntness of my question seemed to fully awaken James to the reality of his actions. For several moments he sat in silence, then sighed deeply. "What do you want from me, Barbara?" "The truth," I replied simply. "All of it." What followed was a complete confession. James detailed every interaction with Thomas, every document he had shared, every conversation about strategies to gain control of my assets. Most disturbingly, he revealed that Thomas had been researching offshore accounts to move my money where it would be difficult to recover. "He also had me run credit checks in your name," James admitted. "He's opened several credit cards using your information. There's about $45,000 in debt across 3 cards already. This was outright identity theft, a serious crime." When I asked James why he would participate in something so clearly illegal, he looked away. "Thomas said you'd approved it but couldn't handle the paperwork yourself anymore." I chose to believe him. By the end of our meeting, James had agreed to provide a sworn statement detailing Thomas's actions. His testimony would be crucial evidence not just for fighting the guardianship but potentially for criminal charges against Thomas. "This won't absolve you," Victor warned him. "You've violated professional ethics and potentially committed crimes yourself. But cooperation now will look better than forced disclosure later." James nodded, defeated. "I'll provide whatever you need. And Barbara," he added as we were leaving, "for what it's worth. I'm sorry. Robert would be ashamed of me." The revelation about James was just the beginning. With his cooperation, we discovered the full extent of Thomas's financial manipulation. Beyond the fraudulent credit cards, Thomas had stolen several valuable family heirlooms, including my grandmother's diamond brooch and Robert's watch collection, which he had sold to finance his gambling habit. Most disturbing was the discovery that Stephanie had been researching nursing homes in Arizona, far from my home in Oregon and all my friends and support systems. They hadn't just planned to take my money. They had intended to move me across state lines where I would have no social connections to help me. Armed with this new information, Dana expanded our legal strategy. In addition to fighting the guardianship, we began preparing fraud charges and elder abuse claims against Thomas. Victor suggested we contact the district attorney's office, as the evidence now clearly pointed to criminal activity. As we built our case, I struggled with the emotional implications of what we were discovering. Each new betrayal deepened my pain but also strengthened my resolve. This was no longer just about protecting my assets, it was about justice and ensuring Thomas couldn't do this to anyone else. The most difficult question came from Dana during a strategy meeting. "Are you prepared to see your son prosecuted, if it comes to that?" I thought about the little boy I had raised, the child who had once made me macaroni necklaces for Mother's Day and cried when his father died. I thought about the man who now laughed about putting me in a cheap nursing home while stealing my life savings. The contrast was devastating. "Yes," I finally answered. "If that's what justice requires, yes." The day after our confrontation with James, everything changed. Thomas and Stephanie discovered that James had confessed, likely tipped off by someone in his office who had overheard our conversation. Realizing their carefully constructed plan was unraveling, they decided to accelerate their efforts. Thomas filed an emergency petition, claiming I was not only cognitively impaired, but suicidal. The petition included a letter, supposedly written by me, expressing despair and thoughts of self-harm. The handwriting was similar to mine, but clearly forged something that would take time to prove. Judge Garfield, concerned by the serious allegations, scheduled an emergency hearing for the next morning. I had less than 24 hours to prepare a defense against these shocking new claims. Dana worked through the night preparing our response, but we faced a major setback when Thomas produced a devastating witness. My sister Linda had flown in from Florida specifically to testify against me. "Barbara has been acting erratically for months," Linda testified, tears in her eyes. "She's always been stubborn, but now she's paranoid, thinking everyone's against her. I'm terrified she'll hurt herself if left alone." Linda's testimony was particularly damaging, coming from a family member with no financial stake in the outcome. When I tried to speak with her outside the courtroom, she avoided eye contact. "I'm doing this because I love you," she whispered, before hurrying away. As we left the courthouse, I noticed a man in a parked car photographing me. "Don't react," Dana murmured. "That's probably the private investigator Thomas hired. He's looking for evidence of instability." The surveillance continued in the following days. The same man appeared at my grocery store, my doctor's appointments, even my church. His constant presence made me feel like a prisoner, afraid to show any emotion or fatigue that could be used against me. The pressure intensified when I discovered my car had been tampered with, brake fluid leaking from a loosened cap. Fortunately, I noticed before driving, but the message was clear. Thomas was willing to risk my physical safety to achieve his goals. A week after Linda's testimony, I was involved in a minor car accident when another vehicle ran a stop sign. Though not seriously injured, I was taken to the hospital for observation due to my age and the impact force. While I was still in the emergency room, Thomas presented the hospital with the temporary emergency guardianship papers Judge Garfield had granted following the recent hearing. Without waiting for my discharge or speaking with my doctors, he began making medical decisions on my behalf, authorizing unnecessary tests and consultations with the hospital's psychiatric department. By the time Dana arrived, Thomas had convinced the attending physician that I needed observation for cognitive issues based on the court order. What should have been a 4-hour emergency room visit turned into a 3-day hospital stay. During these 3 days, Thomas and Stephanie took full advantage of their temporary authority. They entered my home with a moving company, claiming they were securing valuables and preparing for my return. In reality, they systematically removed artwork, jewelry, and family heirlooms, leaving empty spaces on walls and in display cabinets. They also gained temporary access to several of my accounts through the emergency guardianship order. Within 48 hours, they had transferred nearly $50,000 to an account in Thomas's name for care expenses, money that would be difficult to recover even when the temporary order was lifted. The hospital stay marked my lowest point. Confined to a room, separated from my support network, and helplessly aware that Thomas was looting my home and accounts, I felt utterly defeated. When a young psychiatrist arrived to evaluate me, clearly requested by Thomas, I struggled to maintain composure. "Mrs. Reynolds, your son is concerned about suicidal ideation," the psychiatrist began, consulting notes Thomas had provided. "He says you've been giving away possessions and talking about having nothing left to live for." "That's absolutely false," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "My son is attempting to gain control of my assets through false claims about my mental health." The psychiatrist looked skeptical, making a note that likely interpreted my statement as paranoia. In that moment, I understood the terrible catch-22 of my situation. Any defense against false claims of mental incompetence could itself be interpreted as evidence of mental instability. On the 3rd day of my hospital stay, an unexpected ally emerged. Dr. Elaine Mercer, the chief of geriatric medicine, reviewed my case and became concerned about the discrepancies between my presentation and the claims in my file. "Something doesn't add up here," she told me after a thorough examination. "You're showing no signs of cognitive impairment or suicidal ideation. I'm going to recommend immediate discharge." When Thomas attempted to override her decision, Dr. Mercer stood firm. "Unless you have a permanent guardianship order, Mrs. Reynolds has the right to make her own medical decisions. My professional assessment is that she is fully competent to do so." Thomas's fury was barely contained. "You don't understand the situation," he insisted. "She needs supervision." "What she needs," Dr. Mercer replied coolly, "is to be free from unnecessary medical confinement. And I'll note my concerns about potential elder abuse in my final report." Dr. Mercer's intervention allowed me to return home, but the damage had been done. My house had been partially emptied of valuables, my accounts temporarily frozen during investigation, and most devastating, my dignity and autonomy severely compromised. That evening, sitting in my altered home with empty spaces where family treasures had once stood, I came closest to giving up. The legal battle had drained my energy and resources. Thomas seemed willing to go to any length to win, and the system seemed designed to favor his claims regardless of evidence. I called Dana, ready to suggest a settlement, perhaps letting Thomas have a portion of my assets in exchange for dropping the guardianship petition. Her response was immediate and firm. "Barbara, we have the truth on our side. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but we've been building a case that will not only stop Thomas but potentially result in criminal charges. We just need to change our approach." Later that evening, Dana arrived with Margaret and Victor, the criminal attorney. "We've been playing defense," Victor explained, responding to each of Thomas's moves within the civil court system. "It's time to go on offense and focus on the criminal aspects of what he's done." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Thomas had been so focused on the guardianship proceedings that he'd grown careless about the evidence of fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation crimes that could result in serious consequences regardless of the guardianship outcome. As we developed our new strategy, I realized I had been defining victory too narrowly. Simply maintaining independence wasn't enough. True justice would require holding Thomas accountable for his actions, not just preventing future harm. The decisive court hearing arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Thomas and Gregory Phillips appeared confident, nodding to the judge as if victory was a foregone conclusion. Thomas had dressed conservatively in a dark suit, projecting the image of a concerned, responsible son. Stephanie sat behind him in a modest dress, occasionally dabbing at non-existent tears for the benefit of the court. Dana and I arrived with our team. "Dr. Brooks, Dr. Mercer from the hospital, Frank Henderson, Margaret Chen, Victor Ramirez, and most surprisingly to Thomas James Wilson, my former accountant, now turned whistleblower. Judge Michaela Patel presided, having taken over the case after we filed a motion, citing concerns about Judge Garfield's handling of the emergency orders. Her reputation for thoroughness gave me confidence that, at minimum, all evidence would be carefully considered. Phillips presented Thomas's case first, painting a picture of my supposed decline with selective examples and carefully edited statements from his paid experts. He emphasized the erratic behavior of installing recording devices, the paranoid delusions about Thomas's intentions, and my inability to maintain my home, as evidenced by the supposed clutter Thomas himself had created during his supervised visits. Your Honor, Phillips concluded smoothly, this is a simple case of a son trying to protect his vulnerable mother from her own declining capacity and from those who would take advantage of her condition. Mrs. Reynolds has worked hard all her life. She deserves protection in her vulnerable years. Thomas nodded solemnly, the picture of filial concern. Stephanie wiped away another invisible tear. When Dana rose to present our case, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Rather than immediately addressing Phillips' claims, she approached the bench with a comprehensive evidence binder. Your Honor, before responding to the petitioner's allegations, we need to address a more fundamental issue. This guardianship petition is not a good faith effort to protect Mrs. Reynolds. It is the culmination of a systematic attempt to defraud her of her life savings. She proceeded to methodically present the evidence we had gathered. The recordings of Thomas and Stephanie discussing putting me in a cheap nursing home, the documented theft of family heirlooms, the credit cards fraudulently opened in my name, and the transfers from my accounts during the brief emergency guardianship. The most powerful testimony came from James Wilson, who detailed his role in providing confidential financial information to Thomas. His voice shook as he described Thomas's explicit plans to move my assets offshore once he gained control. He told me the guardianship was just step one. James testified. Once he had legal authority, he planned to liquidate Mrs. Reynolds' investments immediately and transfer the funds through several accounts to make them difficult to trace. Thomas's face darkened with rage as James spoke. He leaned over to whisper furiously to Phillips, who attempted to object to James's testimony on grounds of accountant-client privilege. The privilege exists between Mr. Wilson and Mrs. Reynolds, not between Mr. Wilson and the petitioner, Judge Patel noted dryly, overruling the objection. Please continue, Mr. Wilson. Our financial forensic expert, Sarah Johnson, presented her analysis of the fraudulent activity on my accounts, demonstrating that Thomas had been systematically siphoning small amounts for months before attempting the larger strategy of guardianship. Dr. Brooks provided his comprehensive assessment of my cognitive health, directly contradicting the cursory evaluations Thomas's experts had performed. Dr. Mercer testified about her observations during my hospital stay and her concerns about potential medical detention for ulterior motives. As our case built, Thomas grew visibly agitated, repeatedly interrupting his own attorney's whispered consultations. The facade of the concerned son was crumbling under the weight of evidence. The most dramatic moment came when Dana played selected portions of the recordings capturing Thomas and Stephanie's candid discussions of their plans. The courtroom fell silent as Thomas's voice filled the room. Once we get control, we sell everything, move the money, and find the cheapest facility Medicaid will cover. She won't know the difference anyway. Stephanie's recorded laughter seemed to echo in the silent courtroom. Judge Patel's expression remained neutral, but her questions became increasingly pointed as the hearing progressed. When she asked Thomas directly about the recorded statements, he claimed they were taken out of context and insisted he only wanted what was best for me. And the fraudulent credit cards in your mother's name? Judge Patel asked. Were those also for her benefit? Thomas had no satisfactory answer. The final bombshell came from an unexpected quarter. Victor approached the bench with a manila envelope. Your Honor, we've recently obtained evidence relevant to both this case and Mr. Phillips' professional conduct. Inside were photographs documenting a long-term affair between Gregory Phillips and Stephanie, dating back nearly a year. The pictures showed them meeting at a hotel on the same days Phillips was billing Thomas for case preparation. Mrs. Reynolds, Judge Patel concluded, the court apologizes for the distress these proceedings have caused you. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, You are clearly capable of managing your own affairs, and the petition appears to have been filed for improper purposes. Enough, Judge Patel said firmly, restoring order. Mr. Phillips, given this apparent conflict of interest, I suggest you consider whether you can ethically continue representing the petitioner. Phillips, his professional reputation at stake, quickly moved to withdraw from the case. Thomas, now without counsel and betrayed by both his wife and attorney, faced the judge alone. Judge Patel's ruling was unequivocal. She not only dismissed the guardianship petition, but issued a restraining order preventing Thomas from approaching me or my property. She referred the evidence of financial fraud to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution and ordered an immediate freeze on all accounts Thomas controlled. Judge Patel's ruling was unequivocal. She not only dismissed the guardianship petition, but issued a restraining order preventing Thomas from approaching me or my property. She referred the evidence of financial fraud to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution and ordered an immediate freeze on all accounts Thomas controlled. As we left the courthouse, Thomas made one last desperate attempt to approach me, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and fear. "Mom, you can't do this to me. I'm your son," he shouted as security officers moved between us. "You stopped being my son," I replied quietly, "when you started planning to throw me away." Later that evening, as I sat with Dana and my other supporters celebrating our victory, an urgent call came from Frank. Thomas had been spotted near my house, clearly intoxicated and agitated. By the time police responded to Frank's call, Thomas had forced open my back door and was rampaging through the house, destroying what he couldn't steal. The officers arrested him on the spot for violation of the restraining order, breaking and entering, and vandalism. As they led him away, Thomas reportedly screamed that I would regret this and should watch my back. His threats, overheard by police officers, added intimidation charges to his growing legal troubles. The son who had once been my pride and joy was now facing potential prison time for his actions against me. The victory was complete but hollow. I had protected myself and my assets, but at the cost of what I had once valued most, my relationship with my only child. As Judge Patel had noted in her ruling, the damage done extended far beyond financial considerations. Some wounds, I realized, might never fully heal. In the months following the court case, I faced the difficult task of rebuilding my life amid the wreckage of betrayal. Thomas eventually accepted a plea deal that included restitution, probation, and mandatory counseling rather than prison time. I didn't oppose the arrangement despite everything. I couldn't bear the thought of my son behind bars. Stephanie filed for divorce almost immediately after the court hearing, attempting to distance herself from Thomas's legal troubles. She moved to California, apparently hoping to restart her life away from the scandal. Thomas, facing financial ruin and criminal charges, moved in with a cousin in Seattle. My relationship with Linda remained strained but not entirely broken. After reading the court transcripts and speaking with Margaret, she began to understand how thoroughly she had been manipulated by Thomas. Her apology was awkward but sincere. "I should have known better," she admitted during a difficult phone call. "I should have listened to you, not him. I was so sure I was helping you." "Thomas was always good at telling people what they wanted to hear," I replied, finding forgiveness easier than I had expected. "He told you I needed help, and you wanted to believe you were doing the right thing. Our relationship would take time to fully repair, but we had made a start. The financial aftermath was complicated but manageable. With Dana and a new accountant's help, I secured my accounts with additional protections, recovered most of the stolen funds, and documented the missing heirlooms for insurance purposes. Some items were recovered from pawn shops and second-hand dealers, but many family treasures were permanently lost, sold by Thomas to fund his gambling habit or his legal defense. The emotional damage was harder to address. I found myself jumping at unexpected noises, checking locks repeatedly, and feeling anxious when the phone rang. Dr. Brooks referred me to a therapist specializing in trauma and betrayal, Dr. Rachel Goldman, whose guidance proved invaluable. "What you're experiencing is a normal response to abnormal events," Dr. Goldman explained during our sessions. "The person who should have been most trustworthy violated that trust in the worst possible way." We worked through my complicated feelings, the grief for the relationship I had lost, the guilt over whether I had somehow failed as a mother, the anger at Thomas's betrayal, and the lingering fear that he might find other ways to hurt me. "You didn't cause this," Dr. Goldman reminded me often. You can analyze what happened, but don't take responsibility for Thomas's choices. Adults make their own decisions, regardless of their upbringing. This was perhaps the hardest lesson to accept, that despite my best efforts as a mother, Thomas had chosen his own path. I had not failed him, he had failed himself. Gradually, I began to rebuild. I renovated my home, replacing painful memories with new decor and improved security features. Frank Henderson remained a vigilant neighbor and friend, checking in regularly and helping with household repairs I once would have asked Thomas to handle. 6 months after the court case, Margaret approached me with an idea that would become a new chapter in my life. We need to establish a support group for seniors facing financial exploitation, she suggested. Your experience could help others protect themselves. Together with Dana, we founded the Elder Advocacy Network, a community organization providing education and resources to seniors and their families. We offered workshops on recognizing the signs of exploitation, securing assets against family fraud, and navigating the legal system when necessary. The work was healing. Each time I shared my story, it lost some of its power to hurt me. Each senior who took steps to protect themselves represented a small victory against those who would prey on vulnerability. Linda eventually joined our efforts, using her experience of being manipulated by Thomas to help other family members avoid similar mistakes. Sometimes the most loving thing isn't giving control, she would tell concerned children and siblings. Sometimes it's respecting autonomy. My home, once a place of anxiety and painful memories, became a hub for planning sessions, educational meetings, and support groups. The rooms that had witnessed betrayal now witnessed healing and empowerment. A year after the court case, I received an unexpected letter from Thomas. His handwriting, once so familiar, now seemed like that of a stranger. "Mom," he wrote, "I don't expect forgiveness, and I won't insult you with excuses. What I did was unforgivable. The counseling I'm receiving has forced me to face what I've become, and I'm ashamed. I won't contact you again unless you wish it, but I wanted you to know I'm finally facing the truth about myself." I read the letter several times, feeling neither the forgiveness he disclaimed nor the anger that had sustained me through the court battle. Instead, I felt a quiet sadness for what might have been and a cautious hope that Thomas was finding his way toward a better path, even if that path would never again intersect with mine. Dr. Goldman helped me see that forgiveness and reconciliation are separate processes. You can eventually forgive Thomas for your own peace of mind, she explained, without ever allowing him back into your life. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. This distinction freed me from the false choice between bitter resentment and dangerous vulnerability. I could release my anger without releasing my boundaries. 2 years after that terrible day when I overheard Thomas and Stephanie plotting against me, I took my first real vacation in decades, a month-long trip to Italy I had always dreamed of but postponed due to Thomas's supposed need for nearby family support. Margaret and several other friends joined me for parts of the journey, creating new memories untainted by betrayal. Standing in the Sistine Chapel, gazing up at Michelangelo's masterpiece, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had survived the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged stronger, wiser, and still capable of joy. The money Thomas had coveted was serving its true purpose, funding the life experiences I had earned through decades of hard work. Dr. Goldman helped me see that forgiveness and reconciliation are separate processes. You can eventually forgive Thomas for your own peace of mind, she explained, without ever allowing him back into your life. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. Today, as I mentor Janet, a 72-year-old widow facing similar manipulation from her daughter, I share the wisdom born from my painful experience. Trust your instincts, I tell her. You've managed your life successfully for decades. That doesn't suddenly change because someone else decides it should. The lessons I've learned are hard-won, but valuable. Family ties don't guarantee loyalty. Financial motives can corrupt even seemingly loving relationships. The systems designed to protect vulnerable individuals can be weaponized against them. Documentation and allies are essential safeguards. And perhaps most importantly, age doesn't diminish our right to autonomy and respect. I don't know what the future holds for Thomas, or whether true reconciliation might someday be possible. What I do know is that I no longer define myself primarily as his mother or as a victim of his betrayal. I am Barbara Reynolds, survivor, advocate, friend, and mentor. My story continues, written in my own hand, according to my own choices. If you've experienced family betrayal or financial exploitation, please know you're not alone. Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else recognize the warning signs. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories of resilience and healing, and hit that like button if this resonated with you. Remember, we're stronger together, and it's never too late to reclaim your power. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to write your own ending, whatever challenges you face.